Joker is written and directed by Todd Phillips. This movie follows a man named Arthur Fleck, an aspiring stand-up comedian who is currently employed as a pay-for-hire clown. He lives in a small apartment with his mother, and over the course of this film, he transforms from a deeply disturbed man into the psychotic killer that we have all come to know. Director Todd Phillips has had a bit of a rocky track record for me thus far, which did not exude much confidence into myself when I first heard about this movie. In addition to that, though they are getting better, Warner Brothers has absolutely had their fair share of misses over the past 10 years, their most recent attempt at a live-action Joker definitely being one that stands out.
Accept it.
Got it. I am not someone who is loved. I'm an idea.
And the idea of having a solo Joker film isn't one that inherently worried me. It is actually something that kind of piqued my interest. Comic books have the amazing opportunity to show different interpretations of characters that we all know and love, and the movies shouldn't be any different than that. They don't all have to be in these very intimately connected films and these larger-than-life universes. We can have a movie like Joker, but we can also have a movie like Avengers Endgame. But I would say that I was especially interested when I heard that this movie was not only going to be set in 1981, not feature Batman, but it was also going to be led by none other than Joaquin Phoenix himself. Regardless of how this film turned out, I was completely enamored with the idea of Joaquin Phoenix portraying this character, portraying a character who is arguably one of the most popular characters, one of the most well-known characters in all of fiction. And I'm not going to be the first person to say this, and I definitely won't be the last, but the work that Joaquin Phoenix delivers with this film and his performance in this movie, it's phenomenal. I mean, he gives a career-defining performance in this film. And when you look at the very impressive career that he has had up to this point, that is definitely saying something. He does something in this film that I feel is almost required in this type of role, and he appears to have just let this character totally and completely take over him. The way that he smokes a cigarette, the way that he runs, all of it is completely dedicated and meticulously crafted to serve this character. And yes, he does give one of the best performances that I have seen this year. And based on the performances that I have seen, he absolutely deserves an Academy Award nomination at minimum. And there are choices that either himself or the filmmakers made, but I thought they were really interesting decisions. First off, the portrayal of this character in this film has a condition to where he laughs at inappropriate times and he cannot stop laughing, so much so that it actually causes him some physical pain because he can't stop laughing. I thought that that was a fantastic decision, and it is so unsettling. Secondly, I love the design of Joker in this film, which very clearly takes some inspiration from a real-life murderous clown known as John Wayne Gacy, which, although, yes, is definitely really grim and maybe in poor taste, it works in being incredibly chilling and really effective in this movie. And in addition to taking inspiration from real life, this movie is clearly inspired by films from director Martin Scorsese, particularly The King of Comedy, as well as Taxi Driver. There is lots of imagery in this film that is clearly paying homage to those movies, so much so that they actually hired Robert De Niro to portray a talk show host in this film, obviously in reference to his role in The King of Comedy. This is something that actually worried me when I was going into this film. I didn't want them to use those movies as a crutch or to not really have much else to offer, but thankfully that is not the case with this movie. In fact, Joker is a completely unique experience that honestly I don't think I can recall having in a comic book movie. Even in films like Deadpool or Logan or even Watchmen, which was DC's last attempt at a live-action R-rated film. And yes, I know The Kitchen came out this year, but I'm going to elect to forget that movie for the sake of my own sanity. And even though those movies are incredibly violent, I don't think that they're the same level of violence that is achieved in this movie. The sequences in this movie are far more macabre than those movies are. When Wolverine shoves his claws through someone's face, that's awesome. When Deadpool cuts off someone's head and kicks that decapitated head at someone else, that's really awesome. But that is not the same type of violence that is happening in this film. And apart from the violent aspects of this movie, I don't think this film even plays out like a traditional comic book movie. In fact, this film is more akin to one that would come out in the 1970s or a Martin Scorsese movie. The way it's paced, shot, everything. This is a movie that is not filled to the brim with action sequences and a lot of punching. Instead, this is an intimate character study of someone who went from mildly disturbed to someone who is violent and murderous, as well as the roles that society may or may not play in that development. Which does bring me to something that people have been screaming about on the internet for weeks now. I have heard from many people who have seen Joker that this movie in some way could encourage or perhaps incite someone to go out and commit similar acts of violence that were portrayed in this film. And if we're being honest, the reaction that certain media could perhaps rub off on those who consume it isn't a new one. You can go all the way back to the 1950s or the 1960s, and you can see plenty of examples of furious parents who were upset at their kids listening to the Beatles. However, I do think that the people who feel this way about this film, I don't think that they're being overly critical or overly sensitive, and I think that their concerns are justified. Because this is a film that is obviously intended to raise a mirror to society and ask ourselves some really difficult questions about who we are and the types of values that we represent when we behave and communicate with others. And I think the problem that a lot of people are having with this movie, myself included to a degree, which I will get into, is the way in which this movie goes about answering some of the questions that it raises. And considering the state of our country and the world right now and the things that we are dealing with on a pretty regular basis, I totally understand why people would feel this way and be uncomfortable with the things that are portrayed in this movie. I totally get that. Because again, this is a very dark and oppressive movie. This doesn't have Batman swooping in at the end and putting the Joker behind bars. This isn't that type of comic book film. But I think the issues that others and myself have are the way that this movie answers some of its questions. Because this movie does take the idea of all it takes is one bad day. This is something that we've seen in Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, and I think that it takes that idea and kind of turns it up to 11 to, instead of being one bad day, it's one bad life. Every day that we spend with this character, every person that they interact with in this city is a terrible person except for like two of them, which I think is the reason that people are getting kind of upset with this film. When you look at something like A Clockwork Orange or even like American Psycho, are the victims of some of the heinous acts in those films, are some of those people bad people? Yeah, to a degree, but do they deserve their fate? No, probably not. But this movie lacks something that both of those films have, and that's the idea of the innocent bystander. In every single incident of violence in this film, the people that are victims of said violence commit some type of wrongdoing to our lead character, which although it does not in any way condone what happens to them, it's almost seeming like the film is giving Joker permission to carry out these acts. And in my opinion, this is a mistake. I think it is crucial that the Joker kills people or harms people that don't deserve it. There are a certain amount of characters in this film that if they were killed, I think this movie would completely avoid a lot of the criticisms that people are having towards this movie, because the film in turn would be saying that it doesn't matter what you did. It doesn't matter if you were nice or if you were cruel, you were just as likely to be a victim as someone else, which is not only much more accurate to the society that we actually find ourselves in, but is also more accurate to the character of the Joker. So do I think that people are going to leave this movie and go, that was a good movie? You want to go kill some people? No, absolutely not. But do I think it's understandable that people are getting a little concerned with the way in which this movie goes about answering its own questions that it self-proposes? Yes. Definitely. In addition to that, from a marketing and a PR standpoint, it seems like Warner Brothers as well as Todd Phillips are completely blindsided that people are having concerns with this movie, which is something that totally and completely baffles me. There are lines in this movie that are not only written to be applicable to 1981, the year that this movie takes place, but they're also supposed to fit in perfectly to today's society. Gotham City, a place that is so clearly overrun with crime and poverty and just corruption that it requires someone to go out into the night dressed up as a bat and punch people for hours on end. That same city is a very clearly supposed to be a representation of America in today, in 2019. Which, a bit of a side note, but I love Gotham's portrayal in this film. I think one of my main criticisms that I have with the Christopher Nolan trilogy is it doesn't really resemble Gotham City at all and more closely appears to be like downtown Chicago, just like regular old Chicago. But I think with what they do in this film, it's a lot closer to the comics and it's a lot closer to my favorite portrayal of Gotham in the Tim Burton's Batman movie. Warner Brothers has taken a pretty big swing with Joker. It takes incredibly influential films from the past and applies them to a major comic book character. This is not some C-list DC side property that no one's really gonna pay that much attention to. No, they took, without a doubt, their most popular and famous character in their entire rogues gallery and they put them at the forefront of a pretty gutsy movie. And I love that you can have this version of the Joker and it be just as valid as someone like Cesar Romero's portrayal of the character. But what Todd Phillips and company has done with this film is take this character and bring it down to the level where if you strip away some of the other DC elements in this film, if you remove those parts, this barely resembles a comic book movie. And if he wasn't named Joker, this movie could totally stand on its own. But unfortunately, with this film, there are some ties that it has to the larger DC universe that I think are actually to this movie's detriment. One scene in particular is very guilty of this. No, I will not go into spoilers, but I do think that this scene was a mistake. I think it's a tired trope, and I think it completely derails the third act of this movie. And to be honest, I really have no clue why they included this scene in this movie, because from all accounts, this is a standalone film. I mean, it's not like they're selling action figures off of this movie, so I don't really know why this scene was included in the first place. But overall, Joker is a really audacious film. It takes big swings, and I think for the most part, they pay off. Joaquin Phoenix gives not only one of the best performances of the year, but one of the best performances of his career, and is one that I do think will stand the test of time. Unfortunately, I think the way this film goes about attempting to answer some of the questions it asks to be a little clumsy, and it does end up overshadowing some of the valid concerns that this movie raises. So as always is the case with comic book films, I do want to end this review with giving you guys some comic book recommendations that if you saw this film and you enjoy the character in this movie and you want to dig a bit deeper, these are some comics that I think will be a great start. As previously mentioned, this movie does have a lot of influences from Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, and I would also highly recommend Batman: The Man Who Laughs by Ed Brubaker. And lastly, I think you should definitely check out Joker, which is written by Brian Azzarello. So did you guys see Joker? What did you think about it? Leave your thoughts and opinions down below. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you liked today's video, and if you did, you can click on the link down below and subscribe to my channel to see more movie reviews and movie related things. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.